Welcome to the second installment of the Stay22 Insight Series, Skyrocket Your Travel Blog Revenue with Competitive SEO. Stay22 helps travel content creators successfully monetize their content. Our free-to-use tech will supercharge your affiliate links and increase your commission revenues starting today. Stay22's goal is to help you save time, earn more, and get back to living your best life. And with that, without any further ado, I will pass it over to Levenstadt, who is our guest presenter here today for our session. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Lauren. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining, and thanks for Stay22 for having me. Like we said, what we're going to do today is talk about different ways of skyrocketing your blog with revenue and competitive SEO. So I'm going to jump right into it, just as we are a couple of minutes past the hour. So I'm going to do that right here. All right. And now that we're going to get started with this, what I want to do is first things first is I'm going to make a bit of a connection here that may not be so obvious, but I think it's an important one to frame our conversation around today. So we're going to talk about, content and travel content and the 10 commandments and what these things have to do with one another. And the connection is this, is that you guys remember back to the story, back to the biblical story that, there were two parts of the story that are relevant. One was actually like when Moses went to go get the 10 commandments, to actually figure them out, to figure out what was on them. That was a journey and a mission in and of itself. And that was a hard thing to do and a hard thing to figure out. But more importantly, once they actually got the 10 commandments, it also became difficult to figure out actually how to put them into practice. And most people, even once they were given to the people and they were known, they were actually hard to follow. So there's this disconnect between knowing and actually having the knowledge and then actually applying the knowledge. And that's because actually applying the knowledge is really hard. Knowing something is, fairly easy and intuitive, but actually being able to apply that knowledge, that's a harder thing to do. And when we're talking about SEO and as it pertains to content and travel content, there is this connection in the sense that we're going to talk about, the 10 top commandments as it pertains to SEO and content today. But actually applying the knowledge that's going to come out of this, that's a harder thing to do. And that's going to take you guys and, everybody that is partaking and is writing great stuff and putting that on the web today, following the commandments, harder thing to do, but the payoff, as we'll see, is extraordinary. So I'm going to jump into this in 1 second. Just so you guys have a sense for who I am before I start going through the commandments. This is just a little bit about me. And I'm going to turn on my lights here for a second because it got really dark outside. So 1 second. Get some lights on. Okay. All right. That's better. You guys still see me and hear me okay? Good. Okay. So this is a little bit about me. I won't go into any of this as it's on the screen. And I did run, just to give you guys a quick background on myself. I after I finished my undergrad, started a company an SEO focused agency, and we grew a large agency and sold that to a very large digital marketing company. That was in December of 21. And then since then, I've been working with companies in two capacities. One is through a boutique consultancy, which is called Conversion Compass, which does boutique consulting on content, often assets that are already available and owned, and how to get more out of them. And the other thing that we do is we host private masterminds for people that are in groups that are interested in learning about SEO and doing that on a more ongoing, structured basis in small group formats, and keeping up to SEO, keeping up to date on SEO in that format and fashion. So that's a little bit about us. All right, let's get into it. So what we're going to talk about today, the top 10 commandments as it pertains to today's landscape, why they matter and how to apply them. And then we're going to talk about examples of the application. All right, so these are the commandments. You guys obviously aren't going to remember all these. We're going to go through each one, and I'll just color them a little bit, right? So let's go through 1 through 10. We'll go through this real quick, and we'll get into them. So the first one, tell your story, right? So that means writing about popular destinations, but to do that in your own experience. The second one is, what matters. So that loosely translates to providing utility, not just a list of attractions. Third is tell your truth. Tell, the truth as you've lived it. Dial in on the experience that you've lived. The fourth is find your tribe. And what I mean by that is striking a balance between niche specific and highly searched for low competition keywords. So really that's what we mean by find your tribe, and we'll get into that. Five is the missing links, which is organizing content using topic clusters and to really think like a digital marketer in that perspective. The sixth is creating that sort of multimedia experience and making it look exciting. Seventh is presenting the blog as an all-in-one hub for resources and knowledge. 8, making it real, i.e. using real photos, nothing's overly processed or stock. Making the blog more discoverable with schema and structured markup is number 9. And then 10 is really dialing in on EEAT, which I think you guys have probably heard about at this point, establishing yourself as that genuine expert, which is what everybody by and large in the business community has to do and is doing today. And you guys are going to do that and are doing it in your own travel worlds and your own travel niches. So that's their reassurance and expertise. Okay, so let's get into them. Number 1. So writing about the popular destinations, but doing that in your own experience and really telling your story. So what that effectively means is talk about these off beaten path locations. Don't shy away from doing that. And it feels like you'll only talk about maybe the mainstay stuff, and that's where you should be focusing in on. That's the wrong approach. It's the off beaten path locations and including that focus around some interesting locales. That's going to be really important. And then the second point is just not repeating everyone else's experience. And it's easy to, or it can be alluring to just kind of follow what other folks are doing and just kind of show that same or tell that same experience. But nobody wants to watch the same movie again. It's like, I was thinking about this the other day as we were putting this together. It's like the Bourne Identity, right? Like first version of the Bourne Identity, Matt Damon, great movie. And then there's like 7 other versions of that movie. One is like Colin Farrell, another stars, I forget, but you see the movie and you're like, okay, this is Colin Farrell in the Bourne Identity. It's the same movie. It's a different European country and it's a different actor. And nobody wants to watch that movie. They've already seen that movie, the original with Matt Damon. So this is something that's important to keep in mind as you guys are sharing your own experiences and to really hone in on your experience and give it that personalization. So, all right, well, how do you do that? Let's talk a little bit about the how. So one is start with a broad focus. So that's okay. I mean, start by looking at, and this is just a Google poll of top trending travel destinations around the world. So we're starting broad here, but then we're going to dial in. So let's just, assume that we're going to talk about Thailand for the sake of this example, right? So now let's dial in on some of these examples of how to frame the travel experience in Thailand, right? So as opposed to the top 10 historical sites in Thailand, rather a hidden gem that you discovered at a specific site in a specific place. And that difference might feel minor, and perhaps it's obvious that it's more than minor, but it is a major difference, especially from the way it's going to be engaged with vis-a-vis your audience. So that is a big point, is to really personalize the experience that you're talking about. And here's an example of it done well, right? This is an example, on the Travel Triangle, and this travel blogger is telling their story, right? It's not just about Thailand. It's how this one experience in Thailand took him by surprise. And the idea of really integrating storytelling into what you guys are doing in your blog, I think is incredibly important. And I happen to be, as I was preparing to give this talk, I happen to also be reading this book, which I don't know if you guys can see, but I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's basically called Superpower Storytelling, a tactical guide to telling stories you need to lead, sell, and inspire. And you guys are doing the exact same thing with your blogs. Like your content, and the reason why anybody writes is in no small part to persuade. And a big part of persuasion is telling stories, because that's how we as human beings learn from one another. It's through storytelling. So as opposed to just, really dialing in on the experience and, what happened at that place, tell your story, because that's as human to human beings are reading your stuff, and people remember and relate to one another through story. Okay, let's slide into the next one. So provide utility, not just a list of attractions, and tell them what matters, right? So here's an example, this commandment kind of in play, right? And if you look at the left side of the screen, you can see like, this is kind of like good to know stuff, but in the internet world that we're living in today, 2024, this is readily findable on like every major avenue, right? Versus the stuff on the right, where you guys can see the screen and hopefully the text is readable. It's talking about how safe Uber and ride shares are in Rio. Like, that is a very specific question that a traveler to Rio would probably have. And you are providing really valuable information to that person by answering that level of detail. Okay. I'll give you guys another quick example on this one. Is we're actually, like, my family is going to Costa Rica next week. And we were reading some travel blogs about it. Some of them were more general, and other ones got into the details around like credit card usage in the town that we're going to. Like, i.e., like, do vendors in this town accept credit card? Which I just would have never even thought was not, like, I would have just assumed to take a credit card. But no, like 50% of the vendors in this town do not accept credit card. So having access to that level of information, now I know I need to go to the bank and get local currency in American dollars, super helpful. And I will remember that travel blogger and come back. They built a relationship with me just by their valuable information. So that's what we're talking about here. And this is, just happened to me. Part of this is also just going around the web, and this is obviously pulled from Reddit, but like every great business, you guys are running businesses, and it is getting, the market research and the intel to understand what your customer, i.e. the reader, is looking for. So I'd really recommend, is going through, the second commandment of really doing market research, looking around and thinking about what people and what your audience is looking for from you. And that will change over time as the internet grows and adapts, and the kind of information people are looking for. It's different today than it was 5 years ago. So this is, I think, really important to continue to be doing this and have this inform your writing and what it is you're writing about, because that's a huge part of the equation. Okay, so we talked about this, the boring details, which can make a huge difference, like the degree of number of vendors that take credit card in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica, right? It's my example. Okay. This is another, like, just a really quick win, which I don't see people do as often as they should in SEO. Literally, like, this is just another example of something that we looked for in booking our trip and thinking about our trip. And all I'm doing is I'm filling in a part of a search. So I ran the search. I didn't even run the search. I just typed the search into the search bar, and I can immediately see all the related searches. And this literally took like 3.1 seconds, right? Just to get in there and figure out, okay, well, are there keyword variants that I should be considering? And we'll talk about like topic clusters and some other concepts, which you guys have probably heard about, or maybe very familiar with, but this should inform all that. And I literally just started typing into Google, and it immediately gave me this list, which is just super low hanging fruit. Okay. All right. I'm going to give you guys a quick example on Plan B Voyage and how these guys have leveraged the first two commandments really, really well. So when I'm talking about, these commandments and tying it back to this, first slide where you guys are like, 10 commandments, what is this guy, what is Aaron talking about? Hard to actually follow sometimes, but when you do follow them, payoff incredible. So Plan B Voyage, if we look at these guys, I mean, they're competing, you'll see, just to give you guys the dial in here, they're competing with like Interrail, right? Which is part of the train system in Europe. And you can see what these guys are trying to do. So you can look at, start off the domain authority of 2, which is basically brand new, major competitors. And what they wanted to do was create these unique interrail based articles that would outrank competitors. Right? And here you can see what they're doing is they've started to create this kind of content based on commandment 1 and 2, which is really what we're talking about. They've done the market research. They understand the market, wanted to understand where you could go using the interrail. And you can see here an example of really great information architecture, which we're going to come back to later on in the presentation, but just to show this to you guys. And you can see, like, just to connect it to this, like this kind of looks like this. I'm not surprised if this is where they're drawing it from. Right? Pretty comparable setup and structure, right? So there's different ways of getting at this, but that's one. And you can see the way they've organized the information. It's not cookie cutter insights where readers are going to bounce. These are, very structured. Like if you're looking for a route from Milan to South Tyrol, I don't know what that is, but whatever, right? They're very clear. The route to Sicily, it's very clear in how they've laid out this experience and how they're laying this out for their readership. And you can see how these guys are doing. Like if you're looking at interrail routes in Italy on the Italian version of this search, like the only search that outranks them is interrail. And these guys are not like, Plan B Voyage. They're not the Marriott. And they're only being outranked by the actual train line, right? So something to keep in mind as we're talking about following the commandments and the importance of following the commandments. Hard to do, but worthwhile. Okay, third commandment. Dial in on the travel experience that you've lived. We've talked about this already, but let's just kind of continue down this train of thought. Okay, so again, to reiterate in part, don't write posts like, best travel destinations of 2022. It's just too general. 10 best ski resorts in Europe. Those are commoditized concepts in the internet world of 2024. And what you guys and girls need to do is decommodify, right? And that gets to writing niches and personas because it's just the web is too saturated for that general stuff that you can find on all these mega websites. Okay, well, makes sense. How do we do that? So let's look at some ways that we really dial into this nexus between niches and personas. Okay, so we've got travel niches and travel personas. So all we did here was we basically said, all right, let's think about some niches and let's think about some personas. And this will be an example of how you could start doing keyword research and to frame it up in the right way. So what we could do here is we could create umpteenth permutations between niche and persona, right? So you could do adventure travel for groups. You could do Disney travel for business professionals. Cool, right? I mean, that would be a cool thing. I would think that'd be cool to read. You could do themed cruises for luxury seekers. So all different ways of linking the niche and the persona and using that as the beginning of the roadmap to drive the keyword research. And this is an example of like an equation that you could use in the way of linking the concepts like we just talked about, that niche persona connection. Okay, continuing along this line of niches and personas, we'll move into the fourth commandment. And this one might be the most important one, even though it's smack in the middle of the commandment list. So thinking about niches and personas, what we're really talking about is what's in white, which is finding your tribe. And finding your tribe is essential in every human endeavor, whether it be business, whether it be, walking around outside and seeing somebody who's wearing the same sports team as you are. Like I was in Mexico over the holidays. I was wearing a Maple Leafs hat. Somebody else at the other side of the hotel was wearing a Blue Jays hat. And we came, and I'm in Toronto. So these are Toronto sports teams for anybody who's not in Toronto. But we just came together and had like a half an hour conversation. And the only reason why that happened is because we found one another's tribe. And what you guys are trying to do through the niche specific, these niche specific, highly searched, low comp keywords is you're trying to have your tribe find you and connect with them in the similar way of seeing somebody at the hotel bar who's wearing your team's colors. All right, well, how do we do that? This really gets into the concept of what's called layered keyword research. So keyword research, you guys know this because you guys are, I'm sure, already doing this, with hopefully a high degree of, you're paying a high degree of attention and time on this piece of the equation. But it's not 2014. Keyword research is not just looking at high volume, low difficulty. That, yes, that is a part of it, but you want to layer your keyword research. And you want to be doing, building out long tail keywords by integrating different concepts into the keyword theme, piecing the keywords together, and creating these layers as you're thinking about what you want to write with. And when it comes to standing out on search and finding your tribe and having your tribe find you when your tribe is searching, this is a huge part of this. Is not just that generic keyword, volume, difficulty thing. Yes, that still matters, but you got to layer the keyword research. This is one way to do it. Another way to do it would be this: trends and experience specific, and adding those filters, layers, same thing, to your keyword research. And when you guys do this, again, I'm going to keep coming back to this, is that, this is time consuming. It takes some effort. It might take some handholding from people that understand exactly how to do this. But when you do it and you dial it in, the payoff is uber significant. And I've said that now, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. And now I'm going to back it up by some math. Okay, so let's math some stuff up here. Imagine we're doing that layered keyword research. And again, this is just by way of example. Here's a list of different keyword families. So let's just use the top one, and you guys will see where I'm going with this, I think, pretty quickly. So you can see female solo travel is the keyword family. That's not the keyword, that's the family. There's about 43,500 searches. That's just in the continental United States per month. There's about 2,800 ways of saying that. And the average keyword difficulty on this family is 27, which is actually not bad at all. If you're in position 1 through 5 on this keyword, you're picking up about a quarter of the search traffic.
Aaron, I think we're still behind a slide.
Oh, I don't know why it came up on my one screen.
There we go.
Can you see that? All right, sorry about that. All right, thank you. Thank you for interrupting. Okay, so like I said, female solo traveler is the family, the volume, the number of variants, i.e. different ways of saying this concept, and then the difficulty, which I just said not too significant, and then the traffic on this exact term, about 11K in the continental United States. So if you do the same thing down the spreadsheet, I'm just going to equal and sum, and I get to this number here, 40,933, just on this keyword, this list of families or concepts. Okay. These stats are from a variety of tools. So I just saw that question come up. I can speak to more of that in the question section, but just a whole variety of tools that we pull from to pull the data, which I can talk more about. But just to run down the concept here. So 41,000 almost searches here, right? Let's take a look at that. Let's assume that you have a conversion rate of 5% on your content, right? So people are clicking through and converting into commissionable sales at 5%. So that would mean on 40,933 searches in a month that you've just got these new searches from, 5% is about 2,047 new sales, right? Let's assume the commission is $50, some assumptions. Assume $50 on each commission. That means that you just created over $100,000 in revenue on these ranks, which you could then layer in with new keyword rank on top of that, because the old just doesn't go away. So by completing this example, by ranking on just this set of terms in a meaningful position, you created about 100K of revenue, or more than 100K. And if you look at what we call the rank added annualized run rate, over $1 million. Okay. So another way to slice at this, same concept, but another way to kind of get at gaps and breaking through on concepts, is competitor analysis. So what this is looking at, and we're just using an example here of a travel site. So imagine that, indietraveler.co, which I believe is in the Stay22 family. But imagine you are them and you're looking at some competitors across the horn here. what this is showing is basically against these competitors, what each website is basically ranking on in terms of keyword clusters. And this is, I think, super interesting because you can actually see that these are all, they're all kind of covering travel, but the overlap is by and large not there. And what that means, put differently, is they're all ranking except for this cluster of keywords. These are all different keywords that the sites are respectively ranking for. So very little overlap actually in terms of the keywords that the respective sites are ranking for or vying to rank for. Right. So when you get into that, you can say, well, you don't have that much overlap. You can go a level deeper and you can say, on this specific term, we're basically seeing like not very much. This is a 590 volume search term, this exact term spelled to the letter. And you can see like the nomadic mat has got some rank on this, but by and large, it's not being ranked for and is a keyword that does have some volume, like reasons why one would not want to visit Morocco. So then you could say, okay, well, nomadic mat has got some rank on this. What is nomadic mat doing? And you can take a look at how nomadic mat is addressing this term. But what we're seeing is nomadic mat is actually addressing the term tangentially, talking about 11 ways to stay safe during your visit, which is not the same as not to visit. Okay. So nomadic mat's got some rank based on what nomadic mat is doing, but again, they're tackling this concept from not directly head on. They're tackling at it from an angle. So that's an opportunity because you can see that it's attainable, but we would maybe want to tackle it head on. And now if you're indie traveler, you can see again, here's an attempt to potentially rank on this term or something similar, but they're not ranking on it. And if indie traveler is on this call, you can thank me after or put the check in the mail. But this is another example of how this piece of content, if you're attempting to rank for something like not to visit Morocco, this piece of content for you right now isn't cutting it. And there's lots of reasons why that might be. It could be it's not targeted properly in terms of keyword. It could be that it needs to be refreshed, which is in line with a recent update called the freshness update. You need to keep the content fresh, and I can talk about that later on today. But remixing the content, there's something going on here where they're trying to get at the term, or so it looks like, but you can also see this is an old post, right? So they need to rethink the strategy. And if indie travel is on, you should rethink your strategy around this. So that's an example of how you can go about looking at your own site around that term and how you can go about looking at a competitor that is trying to tackle it. And there seems to be a gap in the landscape and you can tackle it from a different angle. Okay. So we talked about keyword clusters. We talked about some competitive analysis. Let's go on to number 5 here, which is really organizing using topic clusters. And this isn't a concept I'm going to go into great detail on because I think you guys have likely heard this before or have come across this, but the idea of really grouping your topics by cluster and not just writing about one piece from one vantage point, but writing about the topic or the piece, I meant the topic, from a variety of different vantage points. Okay, talked about this. So you can see Indie Traveler, one thing again, which while we're using Indie Traveler, one thing they're doing really well here is they have fantastic information architecture. And the way that which is really in line with this kind of topic clustering concept or commandment number 5. So they've really done a great job of clustering the content, and you can see how it's laid out on the website. So this is really thinking about a very logical way of organizing the content. So you can see it's like by guide or by country, and then they have guides for each country. And then as you get into each country, you can see how it's very well organized. And there's a very clear information hierarchy around how they've laid out the content. It's very clear, it's easy for users to follow, and it's easy for Google and Google's crawlers to follow, right? So here you can see that they've taken a lot of time to done this and they've organized this very well. And these are all examples of page one results. So again, following the commandments, it pays off. And there's an example of that happening. And this part of this payoff is in no small part because they've really organized their topics and clusters and information architecture really well. Multimedia experiences. So we'll slide on to 6. So of course you want to make the destination look exciting. Content, as human consumers of content, we got text, we got audio, we got visual. There's 3 ways that human beings can absorb content, right? So text is great, but you do want to add multimedia, audio, and visual. And then you want to create networks that link that content back to your blog, because your blog is by and large where the action's happening. It's probably where most of your links, affiliate links, and commission comes from. So what you want to do is create this network of multimedia across different platforms around the internet and have it all, all roads lead back to Rome, Rome being your blog. And here's an example of that happening. So this is again Indie Traveler, because we're just using them as the example. And they've got a bunch of multimedia, in this case, imagery, so visual, and that both lives on their own websites, and it's also reproduced on other websites that are linking back to the appropriate page on their website. As a benefit of using multimedia, it also comes up in other versions of search, right? So their actual images come up in Google image searches. And travelers and will-be travelers and people that are planning trips will absolutely run image-based searches because they want to see what a destination looks like. So it's another opportunity to come up in search when you're integrating multimedia, tagging it appropriately, and then driving it back to the mainstay, which is your actual travel blog. And this is an example off of the website, just to kind of bring it all back. So this is a video blog that's linking back to the Indie Traveler website. Okay. So we talked about some IA, some information architecture and other commandments, but just to give it its own commandment in and of itself, which it's worthy of, making the information accessible and really thinking about that at the beginning of the planning phases of the content is super important. When it comes to discoverability, especially as your site starts to grow, having very clear information architecture, both for humans and for Google, is super important. Again, on Indie Traveler, just because they are doing this very well. You can just see across the board how everything's organized in a very clear, very well-structured format. Everything's marked in the top nav, in the footer, and you can get to anything within effectively 1 click. And here again, you can see how their resource pages, so this is flights and transportation, and then different modes of transportation that are spelled out on a per mode basis. So they're doing this across the website. It's very clear, very easy to follow. All right. This one, again, perhaps patently obvious, but we'll just, we'll remind and kind of jump at it and make sure that everybody's clear on it. Don't use stock images. Not a good idea, period. Overly processed photos, also not a good idea for a whole variety of reasons. Humans, as well as Google, and Google is integrating all different kinds of things to look for AI and ultra processed imagery. You don't want to be in the crosshairs of that, whether you're doing it intentionally or not. So this is something to definitely keep in mind as you're putting your content together. Let's slide to 9. So making your content discoverable with schema and structured markup data. So I'll give you guys a couple examples of this. And I will call out that this is a great way to jump the queue. Even a lot of large players do not do this and do not do it well. So if you can get the right schema and markup where you're basically having a direct conversation with Google vis-a-vis the schema and the markup, and you're telling Google exactly what you're doing at different points of your website, that is going to be a big benefit to you and will help you jump that queue. Examples of schema, so very popular if you're talking about hotels or even tourist destinations. So this is all different kind of schema that you can attach to your content. A couple examples here. You can see that tourist destination schema coming up here, coming up in the hotel listing. This one happens to be the Courtyard by Marriott as an example. They are using schema, and you can see all the schema laid out. This is just pulled from below. So they're getting more real estate. They're coming up in a preferred position because they are schemaing up their content. Additional schema that you can use and that should be leveraged. So you guys might be saying, this is one of our clients that we advise. This is a very small hotel. I think they had like maybe 6 or 8 rooms, like 6 to 8 rooms in total in Marrakesh, one of our clients. And they have done very well by following all of the commandments, but especially the schema one. So just to give you guys an example of how this plays out. So in part because they're using schema, this is an example of the search, old and new Marrakesh. So somebody is looking for information about the old and the new city. So Levenstadt, right, which is the hotel brand, they're coming up, this is what we call organic monopolization. So they are the first result. Because of the way that the schema is used as markup in the content, they're also the rich snippet that's coming up as the answer to this question right here, attached to their website. And again, I mean, these guys are like, they're not the Hyatt. They're like a very small company. You can see also what's going on mobile here. And obviously it goes without saying, the number of searches that are happening on mobile, they are greater than desktop searches. And again, you can see on mobile, similar, or maybe the exact same search or very similar search, you can again see that it is Levenstadt that is the answer to the user's question by leveraging all of the commandments that we've talked about and schema specifically. Another example, Venture to Paris, also a very small hotel, boutique hotel in Paris. Another one of our clients that we advise. And you can just see here by incorporating the schema and the other commandments, just to give you guys a quick rundown. This is about 6 months of advisory and then working with them to get it all set up right. You can see the increases across the board. So that's why, again, I'll come back to it and say it again. It was hard to go get the commandments, whatever it was, 40 days and 40 nights up the hill, the mountain. It was hard once they had them to follow them, and people were punished for not following them, and how the exact story goes. But the payoff for following them is massive. Okay, last one, and then we're going to open up for some questions. So EEAT, you guys have heard about it. You've read about it. You might have seen presentations about it. In short, what are we talking about? We are really talking about, like in any business relationship, it's about trust. And what you are doing and what you need to do with your content is build rapport and trust very quickly with the reader. How do you do that? So these are different ways. One is how you're actually writing. So the actual linguistics that are coming onto your page, talking about who you are and what you do and validating your credibility. Other things that you've written about that might be off of your blog. So in this case, this was somebody who's written a book that they're referencing on the travel blog. Different areas, again, where within the content and schema, you can be discussing yourself and who you are. This is, again, all different ways of communicating to the reader and to Google that you are credible, you are legitimate, you're the real deal when it comes to what you are talking about, and nobody is going to stump you on questions about your travel blog. And that's what you're really trying to communicate through EEAT. And you will get benefits from it in terms of engagement, in terms of Google rank, and you will get more people that will transact through your content. So you can see here, Merrick Braun is talking about himself and all the things that he's done, the 70 plus countries, and he's doing that both on the content and in the schema. Another way to establish authoritativeness is through topic clusters, which we talked about already, and one of the previous commandments. Another example of that, trustworthiness. So again, I'm basically saying the same thing, but using different words and different ways of establishing the credibilness. I think that's a word. I'm going to roll with it even if it's not. And then again, the 10 commandments wrapped. That's where we'll stop. And we've got 2 minutes. Before I open it up to questions, I want to say one thing that's not on the slides, but I think is no less important. And this is both from an SEO perspective, but as a human being, just, as human beings consuming the content. When you're writing, and we can talk about the SEO and we can talk about all the things that should be going on in the SEO, and all that's really important. But you also want to strive to make the reader feel something. They should be moved by what you are writing. They should have, whether it's some sort of feeling, and it could be like an OMG expression, it could be a WTF, I never thought about that. Like my credit card example, like I just assumed that everybody took credit card even in a remote town in Costa Rica. But this emotive concept and writing for persuasion, and I talked about superpower storytelling in your content. Good book if anybody wants to pick it up. There's lots written about this. That is no less important. It is as important as like the technical SEO and the 10 commandments. All this matters. But what also matters is not just relaying the details, it's making the reader feel something. Because when they feel something as a person, as a human being, they are going to act on your website and they will follow what you are recommending. And I'm going to stop talking there because this is the longest I've talked straight in a long time. So I'm going to take a breather and open it up if there are any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. If anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I will scroll through the chat here and read out some of the questions that came in during the presentation. Starting off with, from Whitney, is there a plugin you recommend for table of contents?
Depends on the web backbone you're on or CMS.
Okay, and perhaps kind of tying into that question is the second, which is it best to keep a table of contents collapsed or open?
It probably depends on how big the table of contents is. So I realize neither of those are direct answers. But if you have a relatively smaller table of contents, if you can keep it open, I'd recommend keeping it open. On the other hand, if your table of contents is just large and there's no other way to do it, there's no problem with having it be collapsible.
I've wondered that question just doing the Stay22 website. As we have a collapsible, I've wondered if the crawlers see that less as opposed to a fully non-collapse table of contents.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect the crawlability of the website. So
Okay.
What does affect the crawlability of the website, and I alluded to this in the presentation, but I didn't actually hit it on the head, is things like having old content that isn't being engaged with and not pulling it down or doing something with it. That does affect performance from a search perspective, because old stale content that's left unmaintained and kind of unpruned, so to speak, Google allocates a crawl budget to every website on the internet. And what it's basically looking for as part of this crawl budget analysis is, are you using Google's crawl budget well? And what that basically means is, are you allocating the crawl budget to pages that get engaged with? So in an extreme example, if you had 1 million pages and none of them ever got any views, and Google's coming around and crawling that, Google sees that as a waste of its crawl budget. It's a waste of Google's resource. to crawl a website that has 1 million pages that get 0 views ever. But obviously, extreme example. But the concept is what I'm trying to relay, that if you did have pieces within your table of contents or content or old content that is sitting on the site that isn't getting engaged with, that isn't getting clicked on, you need to do something about that. And I think that there's a misconception, not with you guys and girls specifically. I keep saying guys, but I mean guys in the collective. But not content requires maintenance. It's not just to put it up and then just keep adding, and the stuff from 2015 can stay there. This is a misconception, and it is hurting you. So we worked on SEO in my Conversion Compass in our consultancy, where we go through and we prune a ton of content, and the site shoots up in rank. And this is often not thought about. So I will stop there and wait for another question if there is one. But it's a really important piece of the puzzle.
From Willa Going Awesome Places, would love your thoughts about HCU and more specifically tactical things we can do with our existing articles. Parentheses, I know you covered some of this in your presentation.
Sorry, can you repeat? I missed the first part of the question.
Would love to have your thoughts about HCU and more specifically tactical things we can do with our existing articles.
Okay, so I'll talk about tactical things that we can do with existing articles. So, we actually, like, through our advisory, we have a specific search that we subscribe to that pulls patent updates that Google files. Okay, so every time Google files a patent application with the US Patent Office, we get a notification, and then we follow that as it materializes, because it often means that a big algorithm change is coming, or they're weaving something new into the algorithm.
Hopefully that helps, Will.
Let me just finish that. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'll just connect the thought there. So one of the big patents that has been filed recently and has been acted on is what's called the freshness patent, which just means fresher content will, all other things being equal, rank above unfresh content. So this is a patent that Google's filed, and it is also being actively integrated into the algorithm. So tactically, I mean, this would be a very quick win, would be have a maintenance program that is being run where you are regularly updating, like more than like a letter, because that's detectable, but you're actually updating your content on the regular so that it always appears fresh and does not appear old, because that is now a clear factor in the algorithm. That is one example of what could be done with existing content to help improve it. And it's just like going to the gym or being on it, like, you should do it. You have to actually do it. And you got to like go to the gym regularly to get any result, right? So having this kind of maintenance program where you're doing things like refreshing content, updating with, what happened in Puerto Vallarta 3-5 years ago, it's different than Puerto Vallarta today. So updating the content in a more than rudimentary, like change a letter or word, like if you update the content meaningfully, that's noticed, it's tracked, and you get a benefit from it. And it's probably the quickest, easiest win you can make with your existing content.
From Cindy, we have walk me through how to personalize the top things to do in X destination post. If I change it to things I discovered, it no longer matches high volume keywords. I am a solo female traveler, but the things to do in the destinations aren't specific to that group.
Okay, so the best way that I can think to personalize is to tell stories. Going back to this, I mean, talked about it a couple times, but this idea, and it's perhaps counterintuitive, but in any human endeavor, business, writing, theater, movies, we tell stories. This is how our minds, like psychologically, like, when we get into whatever, I'm not going to get into like the deep science of the brain, but this is actually something you guys can read about, and I am interested in the topic. I read about it. It is literally how the brain is wired. brains do not remember charts. They don't remember graphs. They remember stories. And like you read a book, you remember like a few sentences a couple months later, just because that's how the brain is wired. But you can repiece together a story. So the best way to personalize is to tell your story, because your story also, in the context of the marketplace, like writ large, and the business context around this, your story is definitionally not commoditizable. Nobody else is you. Nobody else has your story or has lived your experience. I can't think of a better way to personalize than that. And to tell a good story, which follows like a Hollywood narrative. And that's another conversation for another day. But like every good story, there's only like 7 possible story arcs like ever invented that have ever done any well, that have ever done well. So like you can't get a movie deal unless you have one of these 7 narrative constructs in your story. It's impossible. So I won't get into that today, but because we have 7 minutes. But read about it if you're interested, and learn, and if you're not comfortable, read about it, practice it, start writing, and start practicing telling really great, compelling stories.
Thanks, Aaron. From Carol Ann, when you say prune content, do you mean delete?
Yes. Like, I mean, like content that is, and you have 2 options, right? You either need to, if a piece of content is not working, like I think the normal train of thought is, well, just leave it and add more. Like, well, whatever, leave it on the website. That kind of works when you have like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 maybe. When you start having a lot of content, this is actually holding you back for the crawl budget reason that I just referenced. So prune can mean completely remove, i.e. de-index. Like, I mean, you can be on your website, but don't have it available to Google's indexing spiders because it's eating crawl budget that Google's penalizing you for if you're not using it well. The other thing you can do is, and I referenced this in one of the Indie Traveler examples, where I recommended tackling the topic from a different vantage point, right? So, one easy way to do this is the concept is called, I think it's called the ugly twin, or where you basically tackle one topic, or the reverse twin. I forget the exact name of the concept, but you basically take a concept and then you reverse it. So if you're going to say, the top reasons why you would feel unsafe in Morocco, or the top 10 reasons why you don't want to go to Morocco, reverse it and spin it the other direction and rewrite the article from the other angle of why Morocco, and since you wrote that article 7 years ago, is now a very safe place to visit, if that's true. That is a technique you can use. So prune is remove or refresh with a different vantage point.
Next up, we have, well, similarly from Irene, do you delete, redirect to home page, or put in draft? I think you pretty much answered, unless you have anything additional you would like to add to that.
The only thing I'd say on that is just like get it out of Google's index. You can remove it from the website, you can hide it, you can actually add like a no index tag on that page. However, you're communicating your sitemap to Google, refreshing your sitemap to make sure that page, that piece of content is not in the index. That is the key point there.
From DW, any details on ideal length of a blog post and word count?
Ooh, I wish there was like a magic bullet answer to this, and I get it. I get asked it a lot. I would say what's more important than thinking about this question is thinking about a hefty amount of content, like I'm talking thousands and thousands of words, but around the topic cluster. So if you had some shorter pieces and some longer pieces within the cluster, remember we looked at that piece in the presentation where you had all the different things that were stemming around US national parks and weather and terrains, the different parks, and where to hike in the different parks, whatever the topic cluster looks like. What I would say is more important is the the meat and the depth of the entire cluster, and then varying long and short within the cluster.
From ACTA, how often should we update articles for Google's new patent? And any tips on what exactly we can update if a piece was written, for example, years or months ago?
Yes. So I'd say 6 months is pretty good. You might want to do it every quarter. So every like one quarter, every 3 months would be ideal. 6 months would probably be, for sure every 6 months you want to be looking at this, and I would recommend every quarter if you can. Um, I think the other part of the question was around like how to prioritize which pieces to target in this exercise. If I am understanding that piece of it correctly, is that correct? Like how to prioritize which pieces to target?
Yeah, I'm answering for ACTA, obviously, but
I'll
um,
answer that one while you're looking. So the best way to do that would be to actually like open up your GA, whatever you're using for your analytics, your whatever analytics software you're using, and actually look at the pieces. How old are they, and have they been getting engagement? And that's probably there's you can get into a lot more complicated reporting. We won't get into that today because we got 120 seconds. But start there. Start by looking at like how dated is this piece, and you like I would give it like the older, like the more negative points you want to give to it. If you want to give like a rating, like so negative, whatever 10 if it's older than this, or negative 20 if it's older than this, negative 30 if it's more than 7 years old, and then also how engaged is it? So if it's also not getting traffic and it's not getting meaningful engagement and the bounce rate is high, that becomes a good candidate to target in this axe it or reshape it exercise.
perhaps time for one more as it ties back into when you pulled up those data points and people were asking, where did you find this? So David writes, for someone just digging into SEO optimization for their site for the first time, what are some resources or tools you would suggest to look at?
Oh, um, David, you can probably ping me separately on this one because there's so many. I mean, your GA for sure. If you don't have analytics set up, do that. Like as soon as you get off this call, set up your search console. You'll get good information there. Again, if you don't have that, do that as soon as you hang up on this call. Um, there are some good books that are targeted towards some beginners on this topic. We run a mastermind on this. Anybody's interested in that, but there's different ways of getting the knowledge. But I'd say start with Search Console, get that dialed in. It's a Google product, free to set up. Google Analytics, the same thing. Start looking at the data, get into those systems, spend time poking around them, look at the reports that you can run, and start trying to glean information from them. That's where I would start. Because even before you look at anything else, if you don't have that view pane in your mind, other things you're going to read aren't going to gel into your mental framework. That's where I would start.
Wonderful. Well, top of the hour here, Aaron. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all the participants who joined. If you have any further questions, let us know. You can reach out to Stay22. And the recording will be distributed to all those who registered, so no worries about that. With that being said, thanks again for joining. Thank you, Aaron, and stay tuned for the third edition of the Stay22 Insight series.